Good afternoon to our listeners on Parliament Radio 105.5 FM, our viewers on the Parliament channel, and those of you joining us via the World Wide Web on the Parliament's website, www.ttparliament.org. We are just 1 minute away from the start of today's sitting of the House of Representatives. Private business takes precedence today, and we'll continue a motion by the Member of Parliament for Tabaquite. There are some 5 papers to be laid, and 4 questions qualify for oral answer. We expect that the sitting will begin in 30 seconds' time, and we expect that, as is normal for Private Members' Day, the sitting will go at least to 5 or 6 p.m. So we take you over now to the chamber for the start of the proceedings.
Honourable Speaker.
We welcome you to the 22nd sitting of the House in the first session of the 11th Parliament that takes place on Friday, April 22nd, 2016.
Almighty God, we give thanks to you, the Creator of the universe, and humbly beseech you to direct and prosper the deliberations of the members of this House here assembled for the advancement of your glory and the trust and welfare of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Grant that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be established among us for all generations. Amen, Amen, Namaste.
Oath or affirmation. Announcements by the Speaker.
Honourable members, I have received communication from the following members. Mr. Ganga Singh, MP, Member for Chaguanas West, has requested leave of absence from sittings of the House during the period April 22, 2016 to April 30, 2016. The Honourable Dr. Nayan Gadsby Dolly, MP, Member for St. Anne's East. The Honourable Shamfa Kudjo, MP, Member for Tobago West. Mr. Faisal Karim, MP, Member for Chaguanas East. And Mrs. Vidya Gayadeen Gopi Singh, MP, Member for Oropouche West, have requested leave of absence from today's sitting of the House. The leave which the members seek is granted.
Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions. Papers.
Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I have the honour to lay on the table the following papers. The third report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Public Transport Service Corporation for the year ended December 31, 2001. The second report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Public Transport Service Corporation for the years ended December 31, 2002, and the third report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Public Transport Service Corporation for 9 months ended September 30, 2003.
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Sorry, I didn't see the back. The report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Public Transport Service Corporation for the year ended September 30, 2004, and for the year ended September 30, 2005. I beg to move that papers 1 to 5 be referred to the Public Accounts Committee.
Honourable members, the question is that papers 1 to 5 be referred to the Public Accounts Committee. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it.
Reports from committees, Prime Minister's questions, urgent questions.
Member for Caroni Central.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Could the Minister, in this particular case, the Attorney General, confirm whether Trinidad and Tobago is in imminent danger of being blacklisted by any international agency with jurisdiction over financial intelligence, compliance, and or financial reporting on suspicious transactions?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Trinidad and Tobago is a founding member of the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, CFATF, and through such membership, we have international obligations to pursue and abide by FATF 40 recommendations. The Honorable Attorney General has been the chairman of CFATF within recent times and has been driving the process very hard. Trinidad and Tobago's fourth-round mutual evaluation entailed this country completing a detailed questionnaire in June 2014 and an on-site visit by assessors over 2 weeks in January 2014, along with follow-up discussions. A completed draft of the mutual evaluation report was presented to CFATF plenary in November 2015 and outlined several significant technical and effective gaps in our national framework for anti-money laundering, combating the financing of terrorism, and the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, which had hitherto remained unaddressed. The short answer to the question is no, Trinidad and Tobago has not come up for any blacklisting or sanctions. There's a process that is being undergone right now with CFATF and FATF that is being overseen and driven by the Honorable Attorney General. We expect the mutual evaluation report to be finalized at the CFATF plenary in June 2016, and it is only after that time we will be made aware of what, if any, and hopefully no sanctions would be imposed on Trinidad and Tobago. This government maintains its position that such gaps in our anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism regimes are abhorrent to the principles of good governance and present threats to national security of our republic. And this is why anti-money laundering and counter-finance terrorism matters have been given a high priority by this administration, as opposed to what happened over the last 5.5 years.
Member for Caroni Central.
Follow-up question. Has the Attorney General or any member of the government with jurisdiction in this matter, has anyone within the government been contacted either by FATF or CFATF to discuss the situation of fulfillment of obligations to prevent blacklisting?
Madam Speaker, through you, the Honorable Attorney General has, as recently as earlier this week, been engaged in CFATF discussions. He has had ongoing conversations with FATF and other authorities with respect to jurisdiction in this area, and those conversations are ongoing, and we are working along with them hand in hand to ensure as best as we can that no sanctions or impositions are put onto Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes. Are you saying that if there are obligations to be met, these obligations will be met by June of this year, and that on the basis of that, Trinidad and Tobago's situation is going to be determined? Or are you saying that we have no obligations to fulfill that have not been fulfilled?
Thank you very much. Again, through you, Madam Speaker. The answer is yes, there are obligations to be fulfilled. The answer is we are working towards the fulfillment of that. What is taking place in June is the confirmation and finalization of the report by these international organizations. And we're working along with them, as I said, to try and ensure that no sanctions are put on us. So yes, we have international obligations. We are working towards the fulfillment of all of those international obligations. It may happen that all may not be able to be met by that stage. But as we've been doing, we're negotiating with these international authorities as best as we can to ensure that no sanctions and impositions are put on us.
Member for Oropuch East.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, to the Honourable Minister of Housing and Urban Development. Could the Minister please inform this House as to the circumstances under which the Housing Development Corporation proceeded this week to demolish residential dwellings at Thompson Gardens in Taruba?
Minister of Housing and Urban Development.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the lands in question are located within the Taradale Hills Housing Development, and by planning permission reference number T7J1310 of 2013, the parcel of land in question was allocated for as an open space. The open space is to be used for the residents of the community for active and passive recreation. As such, no built developments or structures will be permitted. The HDC continuously reviews its developments for trespassers, illegal activities, and illegal construction. In this instance, no permission was given by the HDC for occupation of the said open space. The HDC posted no trespassing signs on the site in question, as is the practice of the HDC. Notice was given by the HDC on several occasions for the illegal occupants to vacate. Upon the expiration of the time given to vacate, on Tuesday, 19th April 2016, the head of security of the HDC, along with members of national security, demolished 4 incomplete, unoccupied, abandoned, and burnt-out structures, having been unable to locate those responsible for the said structures. The HDC will continue its process of obtaining vacant possession of lands illegally occupied through the legal processes afforded to the corporation, including lands on which those persons who currently occupy illegal structures at the Taradale Hills Housing Development.
Member for Oropuch East.
Is the question to the Minister, is the Minister aware that the lands in question are not vested in the Housing Development Corporation?
Madam Speaker, as far as I'm aware, the lands in question are vested in the Housing Development Corporation.
Questions on notice. Questions for oral answer.
Member for Couva North.
Question number 81 to the Minister of Social Development and Family Services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, during the period September 2015 to March 2016, 647 food cards were distributed in the Chaguanas region.
Member for Couva North.
Question number 82 to the Minister of Education.
Madam Speaker, the Pension and Leave Unit of the Ministry of Education is mandated to process and approve pension documents for retired teachers. On retirement, teachers are required to submit all relevant documents to this department for processing and approval. The approval documents are sent to the Comptroller of Accounts for verification and the final approval for payment of pensions and retirement benefits. The reasons for the delayed payments of pension and other retirement benefits are as follows. As a result of unresolved OSHA issues for the last 3 years, industrial action was taken by the union and employees have been working for only 5 hours per day. There was no increase in recruitment of staff in the last 5 years to manage the large volume of work of the pensions and the leave unit. In the last 5 years, there was no upgrade of the manual system to improve efficiency in processing, thereby ensuring prompt payments. Teachers themselves have contributed to the delay in processing of their pensions and requirement benefits. Some teachers do not submit all their documents to the Pension and Leave Unit of the Ministry of Education in a timely manner, have not submitted their applications for leave, sick leave, and other forms of leave in a timely manner, have unresolved disciplinary matters which affect the processing of their pension and retirement benefits. Madam Speaker, in the next 3 months, the Ministry of Education will be relocated at the Education Tower. This move will facilitate more effective coordination of the departments responsible for timely payment, pensions, and retirement benefits. These departments are now located on Pembroke Street and Frederick Street and receive documents manually from the Ministry on Alexandra Street. And these are then transferred to the Comptroller of Accounts at the Ministry of Finance on St. Vincent Street. Transportation between sites, compounds, affects processing. Thank you.
Member for Caroni East.
Honorable Minister, are you aware that during the last 5 years, the last administration was faced with a similar difficulty, and we made sure that we brought on at least 17 more temporary workers in the Pension and Leave Department? Was that conveyed to you?
Madam Speaker, I have just outlined the reasons, and in spite of the fact that there were 17 additional members of staff, the situation continues. Thank you.
Are you aware that a lot of the backlog resides at the Comptroller of Accounts, and therefore there is need to communicate with the Minister of Finance so that you can get some help in resolving the situation at the Comptroller of Accounts Department? We did that, and we have.
I rule that question out of order. Member for Couva North.
Question number 83 to the Minister of Education.
Minister of Education.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, the Ministry of Education has jurisdiction over 455 primary schools and 125 secondary schools in Trinidad. There are 13,225 teachers in the system as of December 31st, 2015. Between January 2015 and January 2016, the total number of increments due to be paid to teachers was 11,098, while the total number of increments paid was 3,835. The reasons for the delay in the award of increments to teachers are as follows. In some cases, the incremental dates of teachers had to be amended as a result of computation and reclassification of extended sick leave. Staff reports of teachers were either late or not submitted by principals to the Human Resource Division of the Ministry of Education. The delay in filling vacancies by the Public Service Commission has resulted in staff shortages and an inadequate number of staff to process increment documents. At present, there is one clerk responsible for processing between 1,800 and 2,000 increment files. In the last 3 years, as a result of unresolved occupational health and safety issues, the representative union, Public Service Association, embarked on industrial action, and staff working hours have been shortened to 5 hours per day. Unresolved disciplinary charges of teachers also affect the award of increments. In the next 3 months, Madam Speaker, the Ministry of Education will be relocated to the Education Tower on St. Vincent Street. This move will facilitate more effective coordination of the departments responsible for the timely payments of increments to teachers. Thank you.
Member for Couva North.
Madam Speaker, can the Minister state what measures, if any, he intends to implement for principals to send info in a timely manner so that teachers can be paid in a timely manner?
Madam Speaker, first of all, I do not want to lay all the blame on teachers. I have outlined some of the reasons why increments are not paid in a timely manner. But with respect to principals, we have been urging our principals to ensure that they do what they are supposed to do as soon as they have the information. In many cases, the information resides with the teachers, and the teachers themselves are tardy in providing that information to the principals. Thank you.
Acting Whip.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On behalf of the member for Shogunas West, question number 84 to the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Madam Speaker, I wish to request a deferral of 1 week on this question.
The leave which the member so requests is granted.
Request for leave to move the adjournment of the House on definite matters of urgent public importance, statements by ministers, personal explanations, introduction of bills, motions relating to the business or sittings of the House, and moved by a minister, public business, private business, motions.
Honorable members, the debate on the private motion number 1, which was adjourned on Friday, February 26, 2016, will be resumed. Be it resolved that the Ministry of Education initiate a program in schools to 1. Identify children with ADD, ADHD. 2. Train teachers to manage such students in the classroom. And 3. Implement a long-term strategy in schools to assist children so identified. The member for Tobago East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as Minister with responsibility for Gender and Child Affairs, I rise in support of the motion to initiate a program to address attention deficit disorder, ADD, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, in schools. Such support rests on the premise that a child's right to a good education is sacrosanct, and this right must be defended from early childhood to tertiary education. We join our colleagues in taking particular interest in ensuring this right to an education is secured for children with special needs and for all our children in various circumstances. Furthermore, Madam Speaker, this right is supported by our government's commitment to equity as a platform for educational development. Our manifesto and our government policy is clear when it comes to our nation's children in proclaiming our dedication to ensure universal early childhood education and maintain and continue a system of education at secondary and tertiary levels. This expressly shows that our government's vision for younger generations is inclusive of children with special needs, and not least those with ADD or ADHD. Madam Speaker, the state has a role to play in protecting the elderly, persons with disabilities, children, and the other vulnerable groups in our society. We undertake such a role from a policy perspective supported by the necessary service delivery framework in collaboration with other relevant ministries, agencies, and civil society organizations engaged in child development. Our declaration, long before coming into this Honorable House, was that although Trinidad and Tobago has signed and ratified a number of UN and ILO conventions and treaties over the years, what is required is more than substantive action, rather than symbolic gestures, since persons with disabilities are encountering significant barriers. Madam Speaker, in supporting the motion, we accept the reality that due to lack of diagnosis, children likely to be experiencing ADD or ADHD in our preschools, primary schools, and secondary schools are seen and described as unmanageable, impetus, and possessing bad behavior, as my colleague on the other side would have posited. In a school and classroom setting, displays of inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity can be disruptive for the total group, no less than it can be disruptive in the home and community settings. Regrettably, Madam Speaker, the issue of paucity of data must also be addressed. The need for data specific to ADD and ADHD is important for the various ministries concerned with education and overall development of the child. We are aware that research in schools on the subject of ADHD research has been undertaken and are continuing. A 2004 survey of students up to the age of 19 by the Ministry of Education found that 32% presented learning and behavioral challenges. The Ministry of Education would have more data on the acute nature of the challenges we face. Our collective response to ADD and ADHD in the school, therefore, cannot be limited to this arena, but must include support of parents and guardians, the family unit, and the community. Madam Speaker, I was particularly interested in contributing to this motion after I heard the Honourable Member from Tabaquite share his experiences, and also after my preschooler, my son who's a preschooler, being told by his teacher maybe that he has that problem. He tends to be very hyper, very spontaneous, willing to keep attention. But, Madam Speaker, I refuse for them to leave my child so early without having a necessary assessment and monitor him over a period of time. So this motion is really important to me. Madam Speaker, the motion prescribes that the initiative must, 1, identify children with ADD and ADHD, 2, train teachers to manage children with ADD and ADHD in the classroom, and implement a long-term strategy to assist such children. Firstly, Madam Speaker, identifying children with the disorder is an important undertaking in which a government accepts that it must play a leading role. Our support for this motion underscores that we are in fact willing to play a leading role in addressing this issue. Identification of children with ADHD is necessary to provide the appropriate care and support for these children and appropriate training for the staff responsible for their well-being. This issue of assessment and diagnosis is crucial, especially for the child who may not know their condition but are merely presenting behaviors, which pose a challenge to the teacher and the entire classroom. It is equally challenging for the teacher and parents if they too do not understand why the child is presenting with such behavior. From our current experience and realities such as school violence and bullying, we must act, and we must act now to get it right, Madam Speaker. We cannot afford to have the entire education experience for a collective group be made into a negative experiences by a few. We are aware that the Ministry of Education has facilitated training of teachers to identify symptoms of ADD and ADHD presented by children in the classroom setting. We also know the ADHD Foundation of Trinidad and Tobago is engaged in awareness and activism regarding this disorder, making conscious efforts to educate parents, teachers, and guardians about ADHD. Notwithstanding such training and raising awareness, professional assessment of each child will be needed when identified by the teacher who has been trained to identify ADHD. Madam Speaker, it is important to underscore that assessment is a necessary part of the continuum involving identification, assessment, diagnosis, and treatment. Sadly, professional assessment for ADHD is currently a challenge, and we recognize that. Within the public service, such assessments are done by Child Guidance Clinic in Port of Spain and a similar clinic set up in Marabella. I've been informed that appointments to have an assessment for ADHD may take some time due to the volume of cases that we have. Furthermore, consultations with both clinics, Children's Authority and Mount Hope's Children's Hospital will be conducted to glean the widest perspective on the situation at the national level. The additional challenge regarding assessment is the cost. Madam Speaker, I remember a mother coming to see me at my office, and she indicated that she has a child with a special need. And in order for the assessment to be carried out, it was costing between $4,000 and $9,000 TT dollars. Madam Speaker, not everyone has the ability to put that type of money out of pocket to get the private care needed or the assessment for a child. Madam Speaker, Such treatment plan may include a combination or a series, and if you add up the overall cost, it puts it out of the reach of the average citizen, and this is a burden. Madam Speaker, where diagnosis and treatment involves medication, I've also been informed that sometimes the medication is not readily available, and this also poses a risk in terms of continuing care and also having reliable data as to the number of cases we have in Trinidad and Tobago. Consequently, Madam Speaker, assessment outside the public service becomes prohibitive to the poor, for low-income earning families, and for the average middle-income earning families as well. This becomes even further compounded if the parent is also a sufferer of ADHD or ADD. As the Minister with responsibility for Gender and Child Affairs, I appreciate the specific burden for families to obtain assessment and treatment for their child who may be diagnosed with ADHD or the ADD in the public service, and I acknowledge that the current services are inadequate. But this burden is not only felt by families, but also by teachers in the classroom, where such a child presents this disruptive, challenging behavior. It is also felt by a coach who may be providing some sporting activity in a community. It may also be felt by a Sunday school teacher who may be trying to provide that service in a community, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I make this particular observation to emphasize that a collective response is associated with ADD and ADHD treatment. Treatment of ADHD and working with the child in the different settings will aid the teacher who will continue that work with the child in the school or classroom setting. This network of support will be mutually reinforcing, thus reducing frustrations for all concerned, other children, other people in the community, and even the family, and ultimately bring about the change desired in the life of the child. While the government will take a leading role in addressing this matter, all stakeholders will be required to take part. Madam Speaker, this is a challenge, of course, for all hands-on-deck approach. It requires the intervention of the state, civil society, indeed all of us in this august House. Madam Speaker, collectively the schools, the Ministry of Education, the Office of the Prime Minister, Gender and Child Affairs, the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, the Ministry of Health, the ADHD Foundation of Trinidad and Tobago, as well as public and private clinics, are all necessary and part of this response that is required to ensure that children who are affected with ADD or ADHD have continuous, reliable, and equal access to education. This response encompasses the prerequisites of research and data gathering to provide the evidence which is necessary to appropriately inform such a response. At present, there's a dearth of data. At present, the dearth of data prevents the appropriate response needed. We therefore need to undertake the work collaboratively, strengthen our data gathering process, and have an all hands-on-deck approach to this matter. Madam Speaker, the second feature of the motion calls for the training of teachers to manage with ADD and ADHD in the classroom. It is necessary to point out that teachers can only be trained to manage students with ADHD or ADD in the classroom. Teachers cannot diagnose the children, Madam Speaker. It is also important to note that training to identify ADHD can be an ongoing exercise, but training to manage ADHD in the classroom cannot occur before the child is diagnosed with the problem. So in order for us to get to that stage of actually treating in the classroom, we must overcome that hurdle of diagnosing and ensuring that every child is screened before entering the primary school setting or the preschool setting. In the interim, Madam Speaker, I will dialogue with my colleagues in the Ministry of Education to consider possible post-identification pre-diagnosis training program for teachers to better respond to children presenting with ADHD or ADD in the classroom. This may be a useful interim measure to help with classroom management by teachers until such time that the children with ADHD-related issues are assessed and the teacher is provided with a treatment plan for the child. The treatment program will likely outline the role of the teacher in the plan or the role that can be discerned for the teacher in a comprehensive care plan, Madam Speaker. The teacher then be specifically trained to play the role that he or she is needed to do in the comprehensive care plan that is developed for each child. Madam Speaker, as Minister with responsibility for gender and child affairs, it is important to bring the gender dimension to this motion. When the Honourable Member presented, he noted that there were more boys presenting than girls, especially when it comes to being hyperactive. Boys were the ones who tend to be more boisterous, loud, while girls might have been more easily distracted in the classroom. And taking that into perspective, when we are training our teachers, we have to train them in such a way they'll be able to respond specifically to the way the boys present and the girls present. And sometimes in the classroom, we see female students responding differently to male teachers and male students responding differently to female teachers, Madam Speaker. Understanding these behavioral dynamics and how they affect relations in the classroom is important in the training and response mix of teachers, but also helps parents and others in the life of the child to understand the gender dimension. Madam Speaker, the third feature of the motion called for implementation of a long-term strategy in schools to assist children identified with ADHD. The necessary long-term strategy to assist children identified with ADHD is acknowledged. It is important, however, to reiterate that a long-term strategy must be located within a continuum of care. A continuum of care model, and the one that I've alluded to earlier, Madam Speaker, where you first identify, you develop a care plan, and then you start rolling out treatment. That is very important. Too many times we try to deal with the symptoms and not really get right down to the root cause of the problem, and instead of making things better, we make things worse. Madam Speaker, going forward, we want to take a whole-of-government approach and indeed a whole-of-society approach in developing our long-term strategy. The strategy will have to encompass support to and from parents and other persons in the child's sphere of influence. The strategy will be built on the premise that once the child is professionally diagnosed and a program of treatment is determined, helping the child in the home and in the community setting will contribute immensely to managing that child in the classroom setting, taking into account the reinforcement principle alluded to earlier. Ongoing research and data gathering on ADHD will be necessary in devising the long-term strategy, in addition to collaboration with other institutions mentioned before, in order to get an accurate picture of the scale and size of the problem. This long-term strategy will be situated within the National Child Policy. The Office of the Prime Minister is undertaking the development of a National Child Policy, which we expect to be completed and approved before the end of fiscal 2016, if not by the end of the first quarter of fiscal 2017. The policy establishes how children in various settings and circumstances are to be supported in the furtherance of their overall development. Madam Speaker, and I'm really excited that we are undertaking this project. It is important that in planning for our children, planning for the future of a nation, that we have a policy in place, and a policy that is guided by statistics, data, and indeed input from all members of this Honourable House. Madam Speaker, the policy will cover the following 6 areas, namely, 1, a child protection policy with a national strategic framework for child protection. 2, a children in alternative care policy. 3, a nursery policy. 4, an early childhood development policy. 5, a framework for children with disabilities. And 6, guidelines for children in vacation camps and child-friendly spaces. The National Child Policy will therefore galvanize the overall response and situate the long-term strategy aimed at assisting children in general, and especially those with specific needs such as ADD and ADHD. Notwithstanding the absence of the National Child Policy, The National Strategic Plan for Child Development provides for various programs of support to children. A priority of the plan is the provision of secure and nurturing environments for all children. This means the creation of child-friendly environments that encourage a culture of nurturing throughout the community and implementing systems to effectively monitor the progress of children as they develop. Another priority is the provision of specialized services for the well-being of each child, which includes screening for special conditions, access for all to specialized services, and the presence of adequately and appropriately trained professionals to support these children. The long-term strategy would satisfy these measures for children with ADD and ADHD. We are also engaged in the following main activities, which will serve as a useful foundation upon which the long-term strategy will be built, taking account of the integrated, collective approach exposed earlier. 1. A new child protection system is being implemented in Trinidad and Tobago, led by the Children's Authority. The system revolves around the package of children's legislation, which came into being on May 2015. Every single child, 0 to 18 in Trinidad and Tobago, now are supported by a suite of legislation, including the Children's Act of 2012. This new system and the suite of legislations will be instrumental in supporting the long-term strategy of dealing with children with special needs. A new juvenile justice system is being implemented in Trinidad and Tobago, which takes a departure from the current focus on punishment to a court that will focus on problem solving and getting to the root of challenging behavior that bring children before the courts. The court will then work with the child, other children, parents, and adults to help that particular child before it. This court will be instrumental in supporting our long-term strategy for dealing with all children, and especially those with special needs. Madam Speaker, it is not just in the formal school setting that we are concerned with. We have hundreds of our children in community residences that present challenging behavior, symptomatic of ADHD, and also in need of our support. Some children are removed from the very school setting because of those behaviors. Our aim is to have them reintegrated into normal settings, but not without the proper and appropriate assessment and treatment. Madam Speaker, every time I visit one of our community residences and I see the number of children there, it really hurts me, because every child deserves to be with their family, to be in a loving home. But sometimes we do not identify and treat the problems effectively. Children are placed in alternative care. It may seem utopian or far-fetched, but for my desire is that all our children should be with families in safe, loving homes, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we are also engaged in retrofitting, upgrade, and development of programs in our children's community residences, formerly or industrial schools and orphanages. Many of our children in the community residences present with symptoms of ADHD. The Children's Authority, when they are sending children to the different institutions, they develop a very comprehensive care plan that involves a number of different professionals. So when a child is placed into the institution, that child in the care of the state is guaranteed effective and efficient care, Madam Speaker. And I want to commend the Children's Authority for the work they are doing in safeguarding the heritage of our society. Madam Speaker, work in a community residence is currently ongoing. Development of treatment plans and care plans and training for staff is continuous. Training the use of assessment tools and obtaining such tools for treatment is ongoing. Parent training to manage children with behavioral issues and other disabilities is ongoing. Madam Speaker, our government is committed to safeguarding and nurturing our nation's children. We work as all of government, but we also engage civil society and indeed each and every citizen in this care plan. Madam Speaker, My presentation is indeed short, but before I take my seat, I really want to commend the Honourable Member for Tabaquite again. Madam Speaker, Psalm 127, verse 3. Madam Speaker, Psalm 127.
Members, I would like to hear the contribution of the member for Tobago East, please. Continue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Psalm 127, verse 3 states that our children are heritage from the Lord. In this regard, Madam Speaker, it is our collective duty as legislators and citizens of this beloved country to do all in our power to ensure that we safeguard our children's basic right to education, regardless of the circumstances. Be it a disability, a learning disability, be it a physical disability, be it by virtue of the fact that the parents cannot afford it. We have a collective duty, all of us in this House, to work together to ensure that we safeguard, we nurture, we protect the future leaders of our nation. Madam Speaker, I thank you.
Member for Fyzabad.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to contribute to this debate today on attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, commonly called ADHD. I first of all must congratulate my colleague, the Member of Parliament for Tabaquite, who has brought this matter into the national arena for the attention of the public through this Parliament, Madam Speaker. And I also wish to thank and commend him for sharing with us, and it must have been indeed difficult, Madam Speaker, his own personal experience with ADHD. Madam Speaker, I also wish to acknowledge the contributions of my other colleagues, the member for Caroni East, the member for St. Joseph, and the member for Tobago East. Indeed, I want to congratulate the member for Tobago East for what was obviously a presentation that came from the very heart. I congratulate you, member for Tobago East. And through your contribution, I thank the government for their commitment to dealing with this matter. Madam Speaker, in his absence, I also want to congratulate the member for St. Joseph for a very dignified response when this motion was moved, and his commitment to treating with this matter from the medical point of view in what appears to be a non-political manner. And I commend the member for St. Joseph. I also want to say a special welcome in the House to the students of the San Fernando East Secondary School who are here with us today and hopefully will benefit from a condition that indeed affects children. Madam Speaker, I believe that this is an important, relevant, and necessary discussion, and indeed timely, as we are on a daily and ever-increasing basis witnessing behavioral issues involving school children.
Might I remind you of the provision of Standing Order 53-1F. Please proceed.
Madam Speaker, I was saying, Madam Speaker, that this is important and relevant in view of the fact that on a daily basis we are witnessing issues involving school children and young adults in Trinidad and Tobago. And Madam Speaker, this is not meant to be a political statement. This is an issue, this is something that has been with us throughout governments. So this is not a matter, it is this government or the past government. It's something that is ongoing, and it's something that we as a people and we as members in this House need to address in a very serious manner. And again, I want to commend the member for Tobago East for making that point, and I support her on that point, that whatever is discussed here with regards to ADHD is important that we take a holistic approach. Indeed, Madam Speaker, some may say that there is a crisis in this country with regards to children. On the one hand, we witness unusually aggressive and indisciplined behavior among some children. And if you may permit me, Madam Speaker, I just want to quote from the editorial of the Trinidad Guardian today. And as I quote, "A major talking point in recent days has been the actions of two students, one apparently defying authority in a disturbing confrontation with a police officer, the other giving public testimony about bullying in schools. Two separate incidents. And I continue, and I quote again. In one case, unfortunately, a 15-year-old schoolgirl is now before the courts awaiting sentencing after pleading guilty to resisting arrest, using obscene language, and disorderly behavior. The fact that perhaps this student has pleaded guilty, Madam Speaker, tells me that maybe this is a cry for help, and this is something that we should not ignore. I quote again, in sharp contrast, there was a compelling testimony of 11-year-old Michelle Henry, a pupil of the Laventille Government Primary School, who took a courageous stand before a joint select committee in this very parliament a few days ago. And his words, and I quote, Madam Speaker, send them to boot camp, real boot camp, not any petty boot camp, serious, serious boot camp, was this young man's call during a historic parliamentary event that featured troubling events and accounts of bullying and violence in primary and secondary schools. And I make this point, Madam Speaker, because when we examine ADHD in detail, we will see that some of the behaviors that children and young adults exhibit with ADHD may in fact lead to some of these problems that we are seeing in the country at the moment. I also wanted to make the point, and again, I'm happy to hear that there is a national child policy, member for Tobago East, that's been in the making, because we also have so many reports of violence being perpetrated against women and children. But that's a debate for another time, Madam Speaker, and hopefully in the near future as well. Today we are here, of course, to examine the impact of ADHD on our society. And I put it to my colleagues in the House that many of the behavioral problems that we are seeing are in fact resulting from conditions that are not diagnosed. And the point came out where the diagnosis is indeed a difficult diagnosis. So in this contribution, what I would hope to do is perhaps give a slightly different spin in terms of the medical and the scientific aspects of the diagnosis, because we all have a responsibility, Madam Speaker, to detect these children. It is not only with the medical practitioners. By the time perhaps it reaches a doctor's attention, or a psychologist or psychiatrist, it's perhaps too far gone. And we will also attempt to show that early intervention, early detection and intervention can actually assist in changing the outcome of these children who are diagnosed with ADHD. Because a lot of research has now been done on the pathways in the brain, and I'll talk a little bit just about that. So, Madam Speaker, where are these children? Before we go into the science of it, we already have evidence, and if I may just quote, are they within the school dropout population? A U.S. Department of Education study found that students with ADHD had persistent academic difficulties compared with those without ADHD. This means that they had lower grades, there was an increased rate of dropout, and they had a lower rate of college undergraduate completion. So these students, these children, if undetected, are actually not benefiting maximally from the education system. What about crime on those who might be in jail? A study in the British Journal of Psychiatry suggests that between 25 to 40% of prison inmates may have ADHD. Quite interesting. In our own situation, and I quote this guardedly, and this is information from our own local society, the ADHD Society of Trinidad and Tobago, which suggests that 28% of those in the St. Michael Home for Boys may have symptoms suggestive of ADHD. Again, quite interesting, Madam Speaker. We also know that those with ADHD are more likely to be involved in gangs and risky behavior. Quite a problem that we see in Trinidad and Tobago right now, and one that is crying for attention, for a solution. Other studies have shown that those with this condition are more likely to misuse alcohol, tobacco, and other illicit substances. And my colleague, the member for Tabaquite, actually explained in his contribution a few weeks ago why these children may actually seek the use of drugs. Because when we examine the mechanism of ADHD, it is thought to be related to an area of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. And it is related to a deficiency in what is called neurotransmitters. And permit me, Madam Speaker, because we have young children, we have students here who might benefit perhaps from a little bit of the scientific basis behind this disorder. And the point was that there is a decrease of these neurotransmitters in the brain, and therefore the brain sometimes does not get enough stimulation. And therefore, these children may go to use drugs, for example, to give them what is normal, a normal feeling. And so that is one of the mechanisms, one of the reasons. The other issue that makes this important is the fact that these children are more likely, children and the young adults I'm saying now, are more likely to be involved in road traffic accidents. The statistics show that those with ADHD are 2 to 4 times more likely to be involved in road traffic accidents. They have a higher risk of injuries, and they're also more likely to be at fault. So one wonders, Madam Speaker, that the incidence of poor driving, poor judgment on the roads, perhaps the road rage, the inattention, the breaking of the laws, the breaking of the rules on the road, if perhaps in some to some extent, we may not be dealing with drivers who have this condition that has not been diagnosed. So from that point, Madam Speaker, I think it's very, very important that we make every effort to try and detect and diagnose and treat these children. So, Madam Speaker, the speakers before have spoken about ADHD. I think, just again for the benefit of the population, this debate took place a month ago, and perhaps if you can permit me, just to go back through a few of the symptoms that we are talking about, so we can all be on the same page. It is commonly defined as a neurodevelopmental disorder, and it causes the three effects. There's what you call the attention deficit, there's the hyperactivity aspect of it, and there's the impulsiveness. All the authorities agree that these are the three components that are involved. But it must be involved in a way that is not appropriate for the person's age. One of the challenges with diagnosis is that many of the symptoms are what we call non-specific. Many children and young adults, and some adults indeed, exhibit similar symptoms. So it must be in a way that is not appropriate. Also, the symptoms must persist for more than 6 months for the diagnosis to be confirmed. And also, it should start between the ages of 6 to 12. And I'll come back to make another point about the age of diagnosis, Madam Speaker, because again, the recent evidence is showing that we are missing some young adults who may have ADHD. And in fact, in my preparation for this debate, I spoke with the CEO of the ADHD Society of Trinidad and Tobago. And what she revealed to me is that she has recently been receiving calls from young adults between the ages of 28 to 38 who are now recognizing that perhaps they have symptoms of ADHD and are seeking treatment. So I think this is good. This is something that is important. And before, the thinking was that it only occurred in young children. Now we're realizing that it may start in childhood, but persists, of course, into young adulthood. So very important. And Member for Tobago East and Minister for Gender and Children's Affairs, this is perhaps something you can take on board in terms of the clinics that you may be looking at, because you may want to also have an adult clinic in perhaps a confidential way so these young adults can seek attention. So we already spoke about the defects in the neurotransmitter systems. Essentially what happens with these persons is that the pathways that are responsible for what is called executive functions in the brain don't function very well. So as a result, these patients or these children have problems with concentration, with processing speed, with regulating emotions, with utilizing their working memory, and with organizational skills. And this is the basis for explaining their behavior subsequently. So what do we know of the causes of ADHD? The answer is very little, actually. But there are some theories and there are a few thoughts which I think are interesting to share with this House and with the population at large. Although it is one of the most commonly studied psychological disorder in children and adolescents, the cause of the majority of cases is unknown. However, recently, Madam Speaker, a lot of research has gone into a genetic basis for this disease. There are many conditions we are now realizing with additional research in medicine and that may have a genetic basis. And what we have been found is that perhaps when you are born as a child, the genetic basis is there for you to, whether it is to develop diabetes or high blood pressure or cancer. In the same way, it is possible that the genetic basis might be there for developing ADHD. The question, though, is why doesn't everyone who has that gene develop it? And it may be due to triggering factors. And what they are thinking now is that there are certain foods, for example, certain elements, certain chemicals that can trigger the gene that will give you the ADHD. In fact, quite interestingly, one study has shown that if a family has one person with ADHD, then there's a 1 in 5 chance that another member of that family can develop the condition. This is very important from a screening point of view. The other factor that was mentioned, again, this is recent research, is that there may be a dietary component to trigger of ADHD. And they mentioned processed foods, for example, and sugary foods, foods that are high in sugar. And those are bad in their own rights for other reasons. So it's something that we would look at. Cigarette smoking, alcohol, drugs, certain toxins in pregnancy are also known to be associated. There's also the issue of environmental toxins with exposure at a young age, and the evidence is pointing perhaps to lead exposure and also to certain pesticides. More specifically, some work has shown that the group of pesticides called the organophosphates, which are sometimes found in fruits and vegetables, can be associated with this condition. Some of these issues, because it's a brain condition, conditions such as low birth weight and prematurity, which affect the development of the brain, can also be associated with this condition. And brain injuries during childbirth, and I note the re-entrance into the chamber of the member for St. Joseph, because what I would want to do is make a few points, and my colleague for Caroni East did make a few points regarding what we call birth asphyxia and ensuring an adequate supply of oxygen to the baby's brain. As an obstetrician practicing in the health sector for the past 20 years, Madam Speaker, and perhaps 30 years and all, it's very important. You take a responsibility very seriously when you're treating someone in labor, when you're caring for someone, because you're ever aware of the fact that the baby that is born, if you do your job properly, and if the midwives do their job properly, and by no means I'm saying it's not done, the great majority of times it's done properly, but the ones that escape, the ones that fall through the cracks are the ones that we have to look out for. And therefore it is very important that we put our best foot forward and make the steps that are necessary to ensure that every child that is born in the optimal condition. And so I just wanted to make that point with regards to what we call perinatal and neonatal morbidity. We're not talking about babies that die. We're talking about the ones that survive and sometimes don't survive intact. And that can be a burden on society. So, Madam Speaker, another interesting bit of evidence that I came across in my research actually regards a study that was done and reported in the Journal of Pediatrics on March 10th, 2016, just a few months ago, which suggests that the birth month may impact on the diagnosis. What the study did was that, and this was conducted on close to 400 children, ages 4 to 17, and they found that those who were born in September were actually diagnosed less than those who were born in August. I want to clarify, Madam Speaker. It has to do with the entry.
Sorry, would the Minister give way just for 1 minute? Sure. Minister, would you just repeat? I call him Minister. Member. Have great foresight? Nah. This is just, anyway. Would you please repeat what you just said? I didn't hear you clearly.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I need to clarify the study. What was... Am I coming across? Yeah, what the study did was it looked at 378,881 children, ages 4 to 17. And they looked at the rate of ADHD diagnosed in these children. And they found that those who were born in September had a lower rate than those who were born in August. But the point of it was that, and it's important when we are diagnosing ADHD, the point, that's, you hear me? Welcome.
It shows.
Welcome to the club. We're good. We're good. Yeah, we're good. May is very good, 17. Middle, 17. But the point, Madam Speaker. But the point of this study, Madam Speaker, is that it relates to the date of entry into the school. So it means that in a particular class, and I thought it was a very clever study, it means that in a particular class, if you are diagnosing the youngest child in the class with ADHD, then you have to be careful, because you might be looking at a child whose brain development may not necessarily have reached that of a child that is almost 11 months older. So I thought it was an important study, and I thought it was something that we should, bring to the attention, and perhaps the Minister of Education, Ministers of Education might be interested in that. But it really is to make the point that as far as the diagnosis is concerned, this is an important study. And what was important furthermore, is that in that study, it held equally for boys and girls. Now, we know in the general population that the incidence in boys is almost twice as high as that in girls. But in that particular group, they found it was equal in boys and girls. So again, interesting. I also wanted to make the point about some myths about ADHD. And the following are not known causes of ADHD, but we have evidence, so there is some evidence that they can make ADHD symptoms worse for some children. So these are not causes, they're not associated, but they can make the child with ADHD worse. And that is watching too much television, eating too much sugar. That seems to come up all the time for some reason. Maybe it's not a good thing. Family stress where there's conflict and poverty. But again, one has to separate that, because we know that the child with ADHD would also create some sort of conflict in the family situation, in the home and so on, and certain traumatic experiences. So, Madam Speaker,
Honourable Member,
sure.
You mentioned the possible link between sugar intake and ADHD. I read the same studies, and the studies seem inconclusive at best. Is it that you are saying, because we have to be careful, that increased intake of sugars may cause or precipitate or may be a factor in AD, in attention deficit?
Thank you, Member Professor Joseph. No, I'm not saying that at all. But I also mentioned it because it would be a good selling point for you, Minister, to use it as if you didn't need any more excuses to discourage to discourage that kind of behavior and that kind of diet,
You're starring me, man.
So, Madam Speaker, if I may continue, and just to So, Madam Speaker, again, just to put this whole matter into perspective, and in terms of the extent of the problem.
Members, could we desist from the running commentaries, please? Continue, please, Member for Fyzabad.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was going to make the point about, just to put the whole issue of numbers in perspective, the WHO has estimated that ADHD affects 39 million people. This was figures in 2013. It is estimated that in the USA, there are 15 million people with ADHD. The American Psychiatric Association, in its Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which I will refer to now as DSM for brevity, states that 5% of children have ADHD. Figures from the CDC, which is the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, suggest a figure of 11% of children, and this was in 2011. So overall, when one looks at the figure, and again, it has to do with how it is diagnosed and the criteria they use, we look at a figure of about 11 or 12%, which is accepted in most populations. Exact data is not available in Trinidad and Tobago. However, we do have some local data from the Community Pediatrics Clinic at the Southwest Regional Health Authority, and I believe the member for St. Joseph alluded to these figures in his presentation, and I just want to confirm and verify that for the year 2014 to 2015, out of 1,070 children who were seen at these clinics, 128 children were diagnosed with ADHD, and that gives an incidence of about 12% in our population. So it is in keeping with the world figures. What is this? How is this important in terms of the young people in our country? CSO data from 2014 give the under 19 population of Trinidad and Tobago as 376,643 under 19. And what we are saying is that if 11% of this population have ADHD, then we might be looking at a figure of about 41,430 children, quite a significant number, Madam Speaker and Honorable Minister. And even if we use a conservative incidence of, say, 3%, we're still looking at close to 12,000 children affected. So it is a significant number. I wanted to make that point. So how is the diagnosis confirmed? And we've heard earlier from other speakers that it is a very difficult diagnosis. It's a nebulous diagnosis, but there are certain criteria that are standard and can be used by those trained to use them. And again, we talk about DSM, and the DSM is something that speaks about the diagnostic criteria, and we talk about DSM-5, which means that there was a DSM-4. DSM-5 is the latest in 2013, and the important change for DSM-5 is that again, the old thinking was that you could only diagnose this in children who exhibited symptoms under 7, and that was DSM-4. DSM-5 is now saying, okay, you need to look at the young adults as well. So those maybe up to 12, 13, 14, look at them more carefully, and you can make the diagnosis. The guidelines are very specific, and the reason why the guidelines are specific is because we know almost everyone can show signs of this behavior at some time or the other. So they have guidelines for children and teenagers, and they say that the symptoms must be more frequent or severe when compared to children of the same age. And likewise, in adults, they say that the symptoms must affect the ability to function in daily life and persist from adolescence. And additionally, you have to look at the impact of the symptoms on at least 2 areas out of 4 areas in daily life. And they say you have to look at the effect in the home, in the social setting, in school, and at work. And of course, as we mentioned before, the symptoms must present for at least 6 months. The DSM classification also speaks to 3 presentations of ADHD. The first one is what you're called predominantly inattentive. That's the inattention, and that's where you have individuals who find it difficult to finish a task, to organize or finish a task, difficult for them to pay attention to details or follow instructions or conversations, persons who are easily distracted or forget details of daily routines. And then you have the predominantly hyperactive or impulsive. That speaks to those who fidget and talk a lot. They cannot sit still for long. They may interrupt others. They grab things from people or speak at inappropriate times. They find it hard to wait their turn or listen to directions. And they may have more accidents and injuries than others. Yeah, like you. All right. But the point about that, and of course this point was made already, Madam Speaker, is that hyperactivity has sometimes manifested itself in quite super performance. And we had mention of Branson and well, and others who have performed quite well. So it can be an advantage sometimes if it's harnessed in the right direction. And well, they talk about the severity level of mild, moderate, and severe in terms of the treatment and treatment plans. That's important because remember, for Tobago is if you categorize, then you can know how to allocate your resources. And so that's an important classification. What was also important to note is that the severity level and the type, the presentation type, can actually change during a person's lifetime. So you can be mild at one time or severe at one time and come back to mild and so on, or go from inattention to hyperactivity. So I think it's very important. Now, Madam Speaker, who should be responsible for diagnosing this condition, this very important condition in our children? Who should be responsible? And we have to maybe make a little differentiation between screening for the condition, creating awareness, and making a definitive diagnosis. I put it to you that parents have a very, very important role. And we see a very good parent in the member for Tobago East who shared with us the fact that she was looking at one of her children and thinking about it. So that's the kind of awareness that we need to create. And I commend you for sharing that with the House and with the nation. That's very important. Because you see, Madam Speaker, it's very important that you know, we don't, as parents, sometimes we say we leave it to others to make the diagnosis, but we have the primary role. We are the ones seeing the children. Yes. And the Minister of Education will be very happy to hear this because he knows that now parents seem to abandon their responsibilities and they depend on the teachers to do what they should be doing. So you, as a parent, has the first responsibility to see if something is happening. And when we talk about treatment, one of the suggestions was something called a behavior diary. And that's available. It's available through an organization called CHAD, which the member for Tabaquite introduced in his debate, and an organization that he had very familiar with. And CHAD stands for Children and Adults with Attention Deficit Disorder. It used to be called ADD long ago, but now we call it ADHD. And they talk about a behavior diary, a very simple diary that parents can just, you know, by observation of the children's behavior, just, you know, you make some notes, you observe the child over a period of time, and you say, listen, something isn't too right here. And of course, then you bring it to the attention. You compare notes to the teacher. And if the teacher is saying the same thing, because the teacher is seeing the child in a different environment. So if the teacher is saying the same thing, well, then you say maybe, you know, we need to get further examination here. And that's when you perhaps seek the advice or attention of a guidance counselor and so on. So that's the first step in terms of detecting this problem. It's not going to be a magical thing where there's no blood test available. It's not a magical thing where you can just, okay, you go to the schools and just do a blood test or do some sort of measurement. It's something that has to be, you know, detected and treated.
Honourable Member for Fyzabad. Your 30 minutes are up. You're entitled to a 15-minute extension. Would you like to avail yourself of it? You may proceed.
I didn't think I could talk for 30 minutes. All right.
Very well.
Okay, so thank you, Madam Speaker. Yeah, I will close up in that 15 minutes, I assure you. I think what is also important is that there are certain associations that we need to take note of in terms of conditions that are associated with ADHD. And again, it's important, and the member for Tobago East spoke about a holistic approach and looking at all the conditions. And of course, it's very important because you're not going to just put resources into ADHD. You want to make sure that you capture other conditions that are associated with it. And one of the very striking conditions is what we call a behavior disorder. And it has been found that 1 in 4 children with ADHD also have a behavior disorder. And it was found that there were 2 types of behavior disorders. And again, this is relevant in terms of the behavior of our children in schools. Nowadays, we have what is called oppositional defiant disorder. And here it says, often losing your temper, arguing with adults or refusing to comply with adults' requests or rules, often getting angry or resentful. That sounds like many of our children. Deliberately annoying others, often blaming others for their own mistakes or misbehavior. And then the other category of behavior disorder is a conduct disorder, which is about breaking serious rules, such as running away, skipping school, being aggressive in a way that causes harm, for example, bullying. And of course, that's a major challenge in our society. Fighting, lying and stealing, and purposely damaging other people's property. So these are behavior disorders associated with ADHD. Interestingly, it's also associated with learning disorders. And data from the 2004 to 2006 National Health Survey, I'm not sure if it's the same survey referred to Member for Tobago East, but it indicated that almost half the children 6 to 17 years with ADHD also had a learning disorder in terms of reading, math, writing, and the difficulty in reading is dyslexia, in maths is dyscalculia, and in writing is dysgraphia. And I just mentioned that because we have the students here who may want to do some further research on these conditions. And of course, the detection would require a psychological educational assessment, which is required for the development of what is called an IEP or an individualized education plans, which member would be familiar with, and member of Minister of Education. And of course, members spoke about the prohibitive costs of these assessments, somewhere in the vicinity of $5,000 and more. It's also associated with anxiety. 1 in 5 children with ADHD suffer with anxiety. 1 in 7 children suffer with depression. Very important. And also what is also important from a family point is that there's difficulty in peer relationships. Parents of children with ADHD report that their children sometimes have 3 or 4 times as many peer problems. And they are 10 times more likely to have difficulties in forming and sustaining friendships. So very important. And of course, we did mention the risk of injuries that is associated with these children, and sometimes severe injuries. Studies have shown that they are more likely to be admitted to intensive care units and to have an injury resulting in disability. So quite important. So, Madam Speaker, how do we deal with what may be a largely undiagnosed problem in our young population, but one which perhaps may be impacting our nation in a very serious way than we currently understand? Well, of course, the first step in treatment of any condition or the management of any condition is to acknowledge that it exists. And this is what we're doing here in this Parliament, Madam Speaker. And again, I think it's very important, and I want to commend those who have spoken on this topic in the very serious manner they have taken it. So we acknowledge it, and we've brought it to the highest level. And in fact, the editorial in today's Guardian speaks about taking these things up to the highest level of the Parliament. We also have to embrace and engage the non-governmental organizations, and we have spoken about the ADHD Society of Trinidad and Tobago. We have to create media awareness. An express article of October 20th, 2013 covered a sensitization and awareness workshop in Port of Spain with the ADHD Society. So the media awareness has been there. We need to do some more public education. And of course, we have to train and empower individuals to recognize the condition. And we spoke about this already. We spoke about the parents whose duty it is to try and screen for these children. The teachers, the role of perhaps Parent-Teachers Association, maybe tutor, the student support services, the school social workers. And of course, we have to provide the resources and the personnel. And again, one of the previous contributors said that we have to have a whole of society and a whole of government approach, member for St. Joseph, and I commend you on that approach. I think it's the right approach. Likewise, member for Tobago East. So we spoke about government, non-government, other NGOs, and education. Well, of course, some of the points I've gone through already with regards to teacher training. Remember you mentioned that. With regards to health, and I just want to spend 2 or 3 minutes on the impact of the health sector, how we can treat with these conditions. The education is very important. The community aspect is important, but the actual medical treatment is also critically important. We spoke about the diagnosis. Currently, we have community pediatricians, we have psychologists and psychiatrists who are involved in the diagnosis of this condition. We have a few child guidance clinics. We spoke about the need for a public adult clinic. So in terms of the treatment, so we have the diagnosis. The treatment, the first line of treatment is usually behavior therapy, which is done by a psychologist to try to modify the behavior of the individual. If that doesn't work, then you go on to medication, and there are 3 types of medication that's available. The commonest medication is one called methylphenidate, which is available in Trinidad by the name of Concerta. There are 2 other medications which are necessary or required in Trinidad, which I will probably mention with the member of St. Joseph afterwards. And I also wanted to make a point with regards to medical treatment, Madam Speaker. And we said that we have 15% of 1 in 6 children diagnosed with another developmental disability. And the point I wanted to make is that how are we going to support and provide for these children? And should we not have a Center for Child Neurodevelopment providing multidisciplinary services and what is called neuro-rehabilitation services? And I want to also make the point, and you will agree perhaps, member for Tobago East, that the treatment currently is scattered and haphazard, and perhaps we need to bring everything under one umbrella. And that has started to some extent in the Southwest Regional Health Authority in 2011 with the establishment of what is called community pediatric clinics. And I want to commend the young professional and the management there for the vision when they started what is called community pediatrics. And it has since spread to other areas in the country. And this is where the doctors went out and met the children, had the clinics outside. And those clinics currently in Point Fortin, in Siparia, in Princestown, Pleasantville, and Couva. But more than that is required, Madam Speaker. A lot more is required. And under the last administration, there was a proposition for the Couva Children's Hospital. And I just want to state, and I'm sure that this document perhaps might be somewhere for the current Minister of Health to look at. And this proposition included specialized multidisciplinary child development clinic, a pediatric audiology clinic for hearing, a specialized epilepsy clinic, neurodisability clinic, neurology clinic, and an ADHD clinic, together with other clinics and son obesity clinic. And I want to commend the member for Baratare Sanwan under whose watch that was started, an autism clinic as well. So I'm sure that the Minister of Health and the member for St. Joseph would look at that. So in my few minutes, just to close, I think, again, there are some very interesting developments taking place. It's not all doom and gloom. It's a difficult condition, but there are actually 3 interesting things taking place in the future for the ADHD that I thought I should bring to the attention of the House and the population. And one is called genetic switching. I mentioned earlier that there might be a relation with the genes causing this. And with studies now, actually there are very interesting studies going on with regards to genetics and genes. And they're actually looking at a method, some way of deactivating the gene that switches on ADHD. And they think that this might be a simple thing, perhaps a simple medication or simple dietary change. Quite exciting, Madam Speaker. If that's where the future is. It's not currently available, but we are getting there. They also talk about developmental screening, and this is very important because they think that if you can detect and diagnose this condition at a very early age, and perhaps through genetic screening as well, early intervention, you can actually train the brain to rewire itself. So if you decide through genetic screening that this child is going to develop ADHD, you can intervene early and prevent the condition from occurring. Quite interesting. Will save us a lot of resources in the future. And another interesting one is something called biofeedback therapy. What this involves is that you can put on something called a virtual reality helmet, and through certain training, it can help you to rewire the way you think, the way you act, and so on. So quite interesting. And it's not science fiction. It's actually available in some research centers. Of course, the cost is currently prohibitive, but it's something in the future, something that we can look for. And what they do with this helmet is that they have specially designed games that can be used to retrain the brain. So very, very exciting stuff in the future. So with those few words, Madam Speaker, again, I would want to support this motion. I think it's a very commendable motion. I would want to say that we should not limit the interventions to only education, but to health and other sectors. And I would want to commend again the member for Tabaquite for bringing this motion, and I recommend the motion. I thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity.
The member for Arima.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Indeed, I'm very pleased to be given the opportunity to take part in this debate. And I begin by saying that we on this side lend our support to this motion. This motion is indeed timely because it has been debated at a time when there are so many concerns and challenges that we find in the education system. And in fact, the debate, the recital really calls on us in the education system to take careful note of students who might be afflicted with ADHD or ADD. I wish to concentrate my contribution this evening on the education sector and what has been done in our schools. I make the point that the Ministry of Education is well aware of the challenges that our students face, those of whom are affected with this disorder. And in fact, there is a unit in the Ministry of Education that is named the Student Support Services Unit that is adequately staffed to deal with students who exhibit this type of behavior. And I make bold to say that this unit has been working diligently to ensure that the necessary intervention is made. In fact, it's good to see when the former Minister of Education applauds me. This unit was established in 2004, and since then, it has been working, as I said before, very well. There are many students who are brought before this unit, and in fact, the officers of this unit are not tardy in the discharge of their responsibilities. In many cases, they are very proactive. They go to the schools and they ensure that the necessary intervention is made. The member for Fyzabad stated a little while ago that he found, on reading the Guardian editorial, that it was really a case of two cities, where on the one hand, violent behavior and unacceptable behavior was exhibited by students, and on the other hand, you had a young chap who was really in a position to show that in our school system we still have very many good students. I had the opportunity this morning to chat with that student and also with his principal, the student who attends the Laventille Boys Government Primary School. And I had a very interesting discussion with him, and I found that he was knowledgeable. In fact, for an 11-year-old, it amazed me that he could have expressed such deep-seated views. It tells me that our education system is in good hands under the People's National Movement. I caught you. I caught you this time. I caught you. The former Minister of Education applauded the fact that the education system is in good hands under PNM government. He applauded that.
Dramatic transformation in 6 months.
Recently, in fact, in February this year, the Ministry of Education embarked on a national consultation on education. And this consultation focused on many areas, including inclusive education, violence and indiscipline in schools, and the school-based management, among many other things. With respect to inclusive education, this debate that we are engaged in this morning, today, really fits closely into what our government and our ministry plan for the education system. We have about 125 teachers who are trained in special needs education. And it is our intention, when school opens at the beginning of the new academic year in September, that those 125 teachers will be deployed in schools that face challenges so that they will be on spot to provide the necessary intervention. And hopefully, some of the problems that we have been experiencing in our school system will be no more. With respect to violence and indiscipline in our schools, we have noted that the two schools that were identified recently, the Shogunas North Secondary and the El Dorado East Secondary, where students were taken out of the schools and sent to learning enhancement centers. The reports that we have received from our Student Support Services Unit has been very encouraging. In fact, With respect to those students who were sent to the Cuba North, or who came from the Cuba North Secondary School and were sent, the Shogunas North Secondary School, and were sent to the Learning Enhancement Center in Cuba, when the assessment was done, it was shown that there was a clear improvement in the behavior of those students. So much so that some of these students have returned to the school system this year, and others who needed specialized treatment have been sent to different areas. This government and this Ministry of Education would like to make the point that we must not allow ADD or ADHD to be an excuse for violent and indisciplined behavior. We accept the fact that there will be some learning disabilities that are associated with some of the students, but not all our students are afflicted with these disabilities. And in cases where we have been able to identify these students, then we are going to provide assistance and support for these students. As was stated by many of the speakers, that the identification of students or children who it is perceived are afflicted with ADHD or ADD is not a simple matter. In fact, a proper identification can only be made by the trained practicing professional. However, in our school system, our teachers will be undergoing training that will allow them to assist in identifying certain changes in behaviors of some of the students. And together with parents, then they will be able to take those children to the professionals who are better equipped at coming up with prescriptions in terms of how to deal with the situation. The teacher and the parent will observe and they will note the behavior of the child. And then, and only then, after this process has been entered into, the professional will come into play and provide the necessary treatment. It is important for us to know this. Again, it has been stated that a proper diagnosis of this disability is usually detected around the age 7. And therefore, in our education system, the early childhood education and care centers, the teachers there, the caregivers, will not be required to pay much attention. But it is when those children migrate into the primary schools in particular, and to some extent also in the secondary schools, then those changes in their behavior can really be diagnosed. And here's where we will need the support of the parents, because very often it has been shown that in this detection, the parents themselves face certain challenges. Many of the parents are reluctant to bring to the attention of the teachers or of the authorities the fact that their children might be exhibiting some form of behavior that might be termed abnormal. Those parents, some of them, are even afraid to bring this to the attention of the class teacher for fear that the class teacher might not understand and the class teacher might be in a position to make all kinds of snide remarks about the students. In some cases also, the parents are reluctant to bring this to the attention of the school and of the teachers because they feel that the teachers and the school system are not adequately equipped to deal with students who exhibit this type of behavior. But I want to give this House the assurance that this government and this Ministry of Education both have put in place the professionals who will be adequately trained so that they can supply support and also relief to those parents who have their doubts. And therefore, I take the opportunity to let the national community know that in our education system, we have made provisions for students who face with this disorder. And this is an important point I think needed to be made. Madam Speaker, an important policy of this government is to ensure that in our education system, we supply or we engage in quality education. No problem.
Is the Honourable Minister saying that even now there are people specifically trained at the Ministry of Education to do diagnosis and to deal with children with ADD?
Yes, I'm saying that. As I've said before, we have a unit, the Student Support Services Unit, and the member for County East could attest to that, where that unit is staffed with professionals who are trained. That unit is staffed with professionals who are trained to detect this type of behavior from the students, and also not only to detect, but also to provide prescriptive measures so that those children can receive the necessary attention. It's unfortunate that your colleague did not share that information with you. Yes, as I was saying, a major policy of this government is to provide quality education. In fact, that is uppermost in our program. And if we are to provide quality education, we have to ensure that every child has an opportunity of accessing this quality education. And therefore, children with special needs must not be left behind. And we are ensuring that these students are given every opportunity to avail themselves of the information and of the help that is available. And in ensuring the delivery of quality education, a very important aspect of this, as we look at this debate, is inclusive education. And inclusive education, as the word implies, means that everyone must be included, even the child with special education needs. And in our education system, we are determined to provide support and services to all learners in our education system by taking the necessary and appropriate steps to make education available, to make education accessible, to make education acceptable, and to make education adaptable in our schools in Trinidad and Tobago. The rationale for this policy on inclusive education, Madam Speaker, is simply because this government, in its 2020 vision and in its action plan, has responded with urgency to the global challenge of enhancing the quality of educational provision through the upgrade of the education system. Madam Speaker, Vision 2020 speaks, among other things, to developing innovative students. The Trinidad and Tobago Ministry of Education, in its Target 2015 Education for All action plan, has acknowledged that such improvement must focus on increasing the learning potential of its citizenry on a more universal and equitable basis. Against this background, Madam Speaker, it is clear that educational opportunities must be provided for all the challenged, regular, and even our gifted students. And students who are affected with the ADHD must not be left behind. They must form part of the efforts at ensuring that they too are exposed to the system of quality education that we will provide and we are committed to providing. This country, Madam Speaker, is a member of the United Nations, and this country is a signatory to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And this government affirms its commitment to the fundamental principle of equal opportunity by acknowledging the rights of all children to receive education without discrimination on any grounds. Our Ministry of Education has what I term a philosophical direction, and that is that every child has an inherent right to education. That every child has the ability to learn, and that schools should provide all our students with programs which are adapted to meet the needs of the varying abilities of our students. And certainly, in the 7 months since we are in office, we are well on our way to doing just that. In this short space of time, Madam Speaker, we have succeeded in changing attitudes, in changing behaviors, in changing teaching methodologies, and even in changing some of the curriculum offerings. In fact, 2 committees have been appointed recently to look at the reform of the curriculum at the primary and secondary school levels. And in this reform, we are taking close attention, we are taking close attention, and we are making provisions to ensure that students who are afflicted with any disability, that they are catered for in our education system. And that is one of the remits of this committee, or these 2 committees. In terms of our teachers and our teaching staff, in order to effectively carry out their duties and responsibilities, we have embarked on the continuous professional development of our teachers. And all our teachers will have access to appropriate, coherent, and continuous professional development initiatives that we have embarked upon in this Ministry of Education. And at the core of this training will be exposure and adoption of effective teaching and learning strategies augmented by a range of needs-specific training. In other words, training that can identify the specific needs of our students. Remember, I said earlier on that the identification of students with ADHD is not a simple matter. And therefore, the necessary training must be afforded to our teachers so that they can identify and provide the knowledge to the trained professionals, the psychologists in the system, so that our students can have the desired help. Madam Speaker, today in our education system, we are committed to inclusion, as I said before, and we are committed to what is referred to as mainstreaming. In other words, students who have special needs, special education needs, we will not have them outside of the education system, but it is our intention to have them sit side by side with students who are regular, whose behavior and whose development is at a standard that we all accept. But we must recognize that in treating with those students with special needs, that special attention must be given to those students. And what we have embarked upon, Madam Speaker, is a system where we have employed a number of students' aides so that they can sit in the classroom side by side with these children and assist them in accepting and accessing the quality education that we are providing. In less than 2 weeks' time, approximately 17,000 of our children will be writing the essay examination. There are a number of our students who are among those 17,000 who have special needs. And this government and this ministry will provide special concessions for those students as they write the exams. This government will provide special concessions for our students in the secondary schools too, who are writing the exams. This government will provide special opportunities that were absent over the last 5 years. This government will ensure that no child is left behind. Madam Speaker, as we go about in reforming the education system, as we go about enhancing the education system, one of the important ingredients in all of this is to ensure that all the actors in the education system are comfortable. One of the major challenges that both Minister Francis and I faced as we entered the Ministry of Education was a staff that was demoralized. A staff that was insulted on every occasion. A staff that was disrespected. And it was our responsibility to build bridges and ensure that sanity returned to the education system.
Sanity.
I am pleased to say that most, if not all, the employees at the Ministry of Education, they now feel a sense of commitment.
Yeah, man.
Our teachers in our schools now feel a sense of commitment, Mr. Arima, so that you too and your children can benefit from what we are offering in our education system. Madam Speaker,
there is a specific rule for interruptions. Any member who would like to make an interruption under Standing Order 47 will do it in a proper way. Otherwise, I would like members to observe the standing order with respect to silence while a member is making their contribution. Member for Arima.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you very much for your protection. Although regularly I don't ask for protection, but sometimes it is necessary to get protection from some persons who seem to be bent on being disruptive.
Bad students.
Yes, bad students. I like that too, bad students. Madam Speaker, as we grapple with this problem, I must say that we are happy on this side to note that the member for Tabaquite had the good sense to present a motion of this order to this Parliament. And I would like to congratulate you, sir.
I leave it.
And as we go along, my hope and the hope of my government is when opportunities like these present themselves that will redound to the benefit of the school system in general and of our student population in particular, that we can hold hands as we march forward.
Kumbaya.
Let's do this together.
Speaking time, your 30 minutes have expired. You are entitled to additional 15 minutes. Do you intend to avail yourself of it?
Yes, Madam Speaker, I'll be very
You
short.
may proceed.
Madam Speaker, in winding up debate on this motion, I want to reiterate that in the education system today, we have a cadre of trained professionals who will deal and who have been dealing with this problem. And I can safely say that many of our students, both at the level of secondary and primary schools, have benefited from this. I made the point earlier that we must not mistake ADDH from disruptive behavior. I want to make the point that this government will ensure that our schools are safe places for those who operate within, and that our students, all our students, whether they experience any learning disability or whether they are gifted, everyone will have an opportunity to excel and operate to the best of his potential. Thank you very much.
Member for Cumuto, Manzanilla.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It gives me great pleasure to be speaking here on this motion. And I want to congratulate Member for Tobago East for her contribution. And just to give you some background as to why this is of so much interest to me, Madam Speaker. In the late 90s, a young lady called from the States and asked me if I would be able to take care of her son. He's about 13 years old, and he had no other family in Trinidad and Tobago. His caregiver, his grandmother, had taken him very ill in the US, and so she did not want him to miss school. So I knew the family pretty well, and I did not have any, didn't hold any opposition to keeping him, and she indicated it would have been for 1 week. So the young man came into my home, very polite young man, very intelligent young man, as Minister of Education had indicated that he had encountered someone highly intelligent, asking an 11-year-old, asking very intelligent questions, very in-depth. And when I thought about this young man, I mean, I was like, all I could think about was how bright, how intelligent, how astute this young man was. Until he came home and spent 3 months, because 1 week turned into 3 months, and my whole life turned upside down. Love him dearly, no relation, but loved him dearly. And when I heard Member for Tobago East speak about having a child and going through different emotions, and the member for Fyzabad explaining, you know, the trauma that one can encounter, I understood it firsthand. The difference is that 3 months later, I didn't have that issue, but a parent are not afforded that. They have to go through that level of turmoil in their home, and it's turmoil because you don't know. Most times and oftentimes parents don't know, and they attempt to discipline a disorder. And you can't discipline a disorder. You have to seek the necessary guidance and help, assistance from medical professionals. And so the young man is in my home, and 1 week later I'm pulling my hair out as to what is happening. As I said, he never lost his his politeness, nothing. But it was just that difference in the behavior, the impulsiveness and the disruptions. And I mean, it was right. I mean, I was literally pulling my hair out. And one day, my husband said to me, because I mean, I knew the family, he didn't. He said, listen to me, you have to make a choice. He said, it's either you remove this child from the home, or I will have to leave the home. It was really that bad. And I'm saying this not to bring about any, ill will or anything. It's just to tell you that there are people out there, there are parents outside there who are going through this emotion and don't know what to do. And member for Tobago East raised this, mentioned the Psalm 127, and I'm a praying woman myself. And I went and I prayed for the young man and said, Lord, you have to tell me what is wrong here. Because I sure don't know what is happening here. And I need answers now. And God is an awesome God. And I was reading some literature. And while I'm flipping through the book, this thing just jumps out at me. ADD, ADHD. And I was like, no way. So I called the mother, this is about 2 months after. I called his mother and I said, can you tell me if this child has this disorder? And she said, yes. I said, when were you going to tell me? So she said, well, you remember that little tablet I told you to give him every day? That's what it is for. And I said, no, that cannot work. This cannot work on its own because it's not working. And so, having read the document, one of the things that it encouraged is for the child or the individual to have discussions, to encourage discussions about the disorder and help them accept responsibility for their behavior. So I told her, I said, does the child know? She says, no, and I don't want him to. I said, well, hear what? You said 1 week, it's now 2 months, and as long as he's in my home, I am taking the prescriptive instructions, and I'm going to speak to him about it. I did so, Madam Speaker, and the young man cried. He cried, and I didn't think he would have stopped crying. And he didn't cry. I was like, are you angry? He says, no, Auntie. I said, are you sad? He says, no, Auntie. I said, tell me, son, why are you crying? He says, Auntie, for so long I have been isolated. And I never knew why. For so long, I felt rejected, and I never know why. For so long, I have been lonely and alone, and I never knew why. Now I know. Can you help me change my behavior? And I said, son, whatever we can do together, we will do. And so it all comes down to informed decisions. We all must have that ability to make a decision on our life based on information. So much so, prior to having iPads and iPhones and all the technology that takes us away from having a family dinner, my family and the young man, we were having dinner around the table, and as usual, we were laughing and talking and having all sorts of discussions. And he impulsively stuck into the conversation, changed it in a different direction. And I just stopped and I looked at him, and he did it. Auntie, did I do that impulsively? Did I act impulsively? And I said, yes, son, you did. He said, I am sorry. And we continued. And I'm going through this story to indicate that there is hope. There is hope. And we can do so much for our children. Because you are correct. The Bible does not lie. Our children are an inheritance. That's what they are. And the former Prime Minister, Kamala Persad-Bissessar, understood that, Madam Speaker, because she focused on people-centered development. She focused on putting special needs, the attention on special needs. And just to clarify what was said earlier, we have approximately 2,500 children under special needs that receive assistance, whether it is from the 14 private schools out there and 11 government schools, for many disorders and disabilities. Regrettably, ADD and ADHD is not one of those disorders. The story continues, Madam Speaker. I decided to go to the school as I had now assumed the responsibility of guardian. And I went to the school, which was a prestige school, and I met with his teacher and I said, Miss, I am here on behalf of young man so-and-so, and I came to find out what was his issues at school, because a message was sent home. And she said, this young man is disruptive, blah, 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 takes away everything, causes confusion, turns my class upside down. You know, I'm tired of him. So I said, Miss, if I explain to you that he has ADHD, would you be able to assist in putting a program in place for him? She said, what? ADHD? No. Get him out of the school. We don't have time for that. Madam Speaker, my son was going to be sitting SCA in maybe a year or two. And when I heard that, prestige school, Minister of Education might be familiar with that school, I immediately took a decision that I would not send my son there, simply because of the fact that a school would make such, well, not a school, but the teacher had made such a callous and harsh statement and decision. Because in my life, what I've understood it to be is that you leave no child behind. And so I started to look at the situation going on in the country, and I started to wonder, is this why there's such a high level of crime among our youths? Is this why there's such a high dropout rate in the schools? Is this why there is a low success rate factor among young boys? And I honestly did not have the resources or the ability to do the research. But I certainly hoped and prayed that one day a government would be able to look seriously at what is happening. And if we can provide the right, whether it's counseling or teaching methods, then we could reach our children and we can, in fact, address the major issues that are facing our country. Madam Speaker, I had the distinct pleasure of being on a GSC committee, and we are dealing right now with violence in school, bullying in school. And it has been noted by the NPTA and other key stakeholders that external factors such as ADHD may be a contributor to what is happening in our country. And so as a result of it, we cannot ignore it. So I'm very happy to hear that MP for Tobago East and member for Arima will be looking at policies that will change and enhance the education system, and that the social systems will be created to support persons who are afflicted with this disorder. Madam Speaker, we have done so much research, and I can give you the background. According to the 2011 Trinidad and Tobago Population and Housing Census, there are approximately 52,244 persons living with a disability in Trinidad and Tobago. And this is equivalent to 4% of the population. This data is reflective of a 13% person increase in comparison to the last census in the year 2000. Madam Speaker, ADHD was not considered in this census, and as such, the figures could be in fact higher. And Madam Speaker, it brings me to the point of when the PP government ratified the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It allows us, as part of key obligations of this treaty, to include the adoption of legislation, providing accessibility to information and accessibility to public places, including roads, transportation, and indoor and outdoor facilities. But more importantly, as signatories, we must commit to raising awareness through society regarding persons with disabilities. And it is for this reason that I commend highly my colleague for Tabaquite for bringing this to the House. Madam Speaker, member for Tabaquite does not know this. He does not know I'm about to say this. But I had the opportunity, while we were on a trade mission, we were stuck in an airport for several hours with 15 other people. So it was not alone, a member for Arima. And while we were there sitting, it was probably 1 o'clock in the morning, so everyone is more or less trying to sleep. And member for Tabaquite was pacing the floor, up and down.
It's back in the ministry.
And I'm watching him, and I'm saying, I wouldn't call his name here, but I'm referring to him, and I said, is there a problem? And it was only then he started to speak about his disorder. And I was quite intrigued, because oftentimes we don't see the value of people. We only see what we choose to see, whether it is what may be classed as antisocial behavior because of the condition, or inability to keep, attention. But I was intrigued because I know the member of Tabaquite to be so highly intelligent. I know the member for Tabaquite to implement as a mayor that place called Shogunas Borough Council. And the administrative complex was designed for 2020 and beyond. And that is his brainchild. And I felt that if it is, we could have someone so intelligent could overcome a disorder, then there is hope. There is hope, and my mind went back to 16 years when that young man was in my home. And I felt joy in my heart that at least where he is now in the US, that he can aspire to be anything in this life. And so, Madam Speaker, I want to be able to encourage the government of the day to recognize that the UN Convention on Rights for Persons with Disabilities is something that we have to take seriously. We can say all that we want, we can put everything into place, but unless we implement it, it is only going to remain on paper. There is another aspect to this UN Convention, and that is the National Enrichment Center for Persons with Disabilities. That, Madam Speaker, was very dear to the Prime Minister at that time, Kamala Persad-Bissessar. And the purpose of this development center was to provide diagnostic and rehabilitative services to persons with disabilities. It was also to offer opportunities for vocational training and employment, and to facilitate independent life skill programs and socially interactive activities. And so, Madam Speaker, I want to say that the PP government had plans and had put things in place to assist persons who live with disabilities. The establishment of the National Enrichment Center for Persons with Disabilities will give rise to the introduction of other multidisciplinary centers throughout Trinidad and Tobago to provide rehabilitative services to persons with disabilities and help with the creation of support groups for families and caregivers of clients. Because, Madam Speaker, of all the persons who really need assistance are the parents out there who, like me, don't know what to do and don't know where to turn to. And it is important for us to partner with NGOs in assisting parents, because as I indicated earlier, disciplinary action cannot resolve and cannot correct a disorder. Because, you know, Madam Speaker, while I was at home with the young man, my children were around watching, and they were just a couple years older, a couple years younger. And they wanted to see if mommy would have corrected this badly behaved child, because they knew they could not do that and get away with it. And so, Madam Speaker, it is only upon gathering the information and understanding the disorder, that I was able to sit down with them and bring about a change in a young man's behavior by bringing it to his attention, which I must say worked not just in his favor, but in our favor. Madam Speaker, coming back to the National Enrichment Center, which is located in Carsonfield, it is envisaged that this center shall relieve and reduce the demand for therapies at the main public health care institutions, including the San Fernando General Hospital, the Port of Spain General Hospital, Mount Hope General Hospital, and hopefully, if we are to take the Minister of Health's pledge that the Couva Hospital will be open soon, that those hospitals will be able to provide some sort of unit to assist persons, and that suitably qualified persons with disabilities will be employed at the center. Because, you know, Madam Speaker, sometimes you don't remember that persons with disabilities are people who have to live and to support themselves, and they are severely discriminated against, which is something that this government sought to reduce and to resolve. And so, Madam Speaker, I want to assure parents out there that if your child is diagnosed with ADHD or ADD, that is not to be taken as a death sentence. There is hope because, as indicated, this House has raised an important issue that has affected the lives of many, many people outside. And I wouldn't take too long because we are all in agreement. The government is in agreement. We are in agreement that it is a matter that must be dealt with. And so, Madam Speaker, while I was preparing, it was noted that there is a questionnaire that the website for ADHD had prepared. It's a checklist, actually, and it's a checklist that can provide a detailed description of your child's symptoms. And this is not at all to replace a healthcare professional. It's actually to aid in identifying if your child may be ADHD, so you can in fact come with solid facts to your health professional to say, I have presented a checklist where it shows that my child may be that way inclined, and so get help. And I can probably give this checklist to member for Tobago East as she prepares to create these, this holistic program to deal with children and disabilities, so that it can be used not just in the school, but at home, because member for Fyzabad indicated that there are 3 areas where you will find this disruption, either at school, either at home, or in social settings. And so it is important that you have a comparative analysis where both teacher in school identifying certain behaviors and the parent at home identifying certain behaviors and coming together to find a solution. Madam Speaker, I'm hoping that we don't have to wait for these 6 policies to be enacted before this simple method is in fact adopted. And that is one of my recommendations, Madam Speaker, that this questionnaire be filled out by both parents and teachers, understanding that attention deficit does not necessarily mean that a child has ADD or ADHD, because most of us may be stressed at some times, and we do have an attention deficit. So it's not to be taken lightly. And so it is important that the list, the checklist, this comprehensive checklist is in fact filled out completely before determining whether your child should be taken to a health professional. In recommending this questionnaire be filled out, I also do recommend that once the data has been collated, that the participants who have been identified visit a qualified healthcare professional to get a medical prognosis and then begin treatment where necessary. And Madam Speaker, member for Tobago East indicated that the cost of this treatment is extremely is prohibitive. And I understand that. I understand it because when I was Minister of Social Development, People and Social Development, we did recognize...
Member for Cumuto, Manzanilla, your 30 minutes have expired. You're entitled to 15 more minutes. Do you intend to avail yourself of it?
Yes, thank you.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm wrapping up, so I won't be too long again. But it is important to begin a treatment as soon as possible. But the cost is prohibitive. And while we were in government, we sought to put a system in place to help parents who could not afford treatment. And this is why the Minister of Education, previous, had put in place, or had expanded the program, because the program was already in place, expanded the program to include more persons who can receive assistance
For special
for special needs
needs.
children.
Coach Enchi knows it.
I also like to recommend that this government commit to taking the necessary steps and ensure that the National Enrichment Center in Carsonfield be functional, where persons with disabilities or disorders can have access to diagnostic and rehabilitative services in accordance with the UN Convention for Persons with Disabilities, which was ratified by the PP government.
Call upon them to open it up and staff it.
Yes, we're calling for you to open it up and to staff it. We want to ensure that no child is left behind. I think the member for Arima read my notes.
Let's do this together.
That's why we're here. Ensure that no child is left behind, Madam Speaker.
The country red. Country vexed. Red with blood. Red with blood, yes.
Madam Speaker, they're having fun here. And to do this, Madam Speaker, we're asking that you ensure and promote the full realization of all human rights and fundamental freedoms for all persons with disabilities without discrimination of any kind on the basis of disability. And finally, Madam Speaker, I would like to recommend that the honorable member for St. Joseph, the Minister of Health, open the Couva Children's Hospital as he pledged. Sunday, April the 10th, 2016, that he was not going to allow the hospital to rot. And so, Madam Speaker, I thank you to staff it and to have it functional. And so, Madam Speaker, I will just say I will give it verbatim. He pledged that the Couva Children's Hospital will not be allowed to rot and is going to be used to provide health care services to citizens. Health Minister. So it is the intention of this government to use that facility which you, the taxpayer, paid for. We are not going to leave it there to rot. And so, Madam Speaker, I thank you very much for this opportunity to speak, and I am happy that the government concurs with our motion. Thank you.
Member for Tabaquite.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Let me begin, Madam Speaker, by congratulating and thanking all of the members of this House who have contributed with such depth and also with understanding to this particular motion, which is a non-contentious motion in the House, but which I think, given the feedback I've had from members of the public, the contents of this debate, since it started 3 weeks ago, judging by what happened 3 weeks ago, has had an impact upon a lot of people in the community. And I thank sincerely everyone for the contribution. Today, I want to thank the member for Tobago East for her contribution, the member for Fyzabad, Dr. Bodoe, who brought his medical perspective and depth of research to the matter that really added a lot of clarity and value to the discussions. And also to thank the member for Cumuto Manzanilla, the personal story she gave at the beginning. You read any book on ADHD and you'll see many personal stories like that. And I think one of the things that we perhaps recognize today in the contribution of St. Anne's East, contribution of Cumuto Manzanilla, and so on, is that in this House, we are all ordinary people also, with ordinary problems. And if we can identify with these problems and look at them from not just our perspective, but from the perspective of the thousands who also have to deal with these problems, perhaps we'll be a more effective House of Representatives in terms of the matters we deal with here on behalf of the people. So I thank you, Madam Speaker, for this opportunity to now wind up this debate. But before I do so, I want to plead with the Honourable Member for San Fernando West, as in his capacity as Attorney General, and perhaps also the Minister in charge of Justice, the member for Port Spain North St. Anne's East. There's an organization called the ADHD Foundation of Trinidad and Tobago. It's a charitable organization. And for 4.5 years now, they have been trying to get charitable status. And because of a complexity in the law, in terms of how the law is being interpreted between two different divisions of the state, they have had difficulties in registering as a charitable status. Another organization, I understand, has been trying to for 9.5 years on the same issue. And I will pass on, through the member for Fyzabad, who has been liaising with the ADHD Foundation, the details of this matter that I'm raising, because I think it's very important that the ADHD Foundation, that they do get charitable status, because we are now recognizing in this Parliament that this is a serious issue, an issue that affects as high as 12% of the population, if we were to go by the figures from the clinic in San Fernando that was revealed by the Honourable Member for Fyzabad, that you have a serious situation, and it is not just now a situation among children, it's a situation among adults. And further, that if we do not deal with this situation as early as possible, where in terms of the child being affected, then it will translate down the road to the adults being affected, and then it will become what has become a bit of a societal problem in the country. And one of the important things to note from what the member for Fyzabad said is that there's no blood test to do to recognize this problem. And the member for Cumuto Manzanilla said it even better, that you cannot discipline this problem like that. You have to deal with this problem with compassion. You are dealing with a behavioral problem, and therefore it needs a behavioral intervention. And this brings me to the matter raised by the Minister of Education. The member for Arima gave us the assurance that there is a student support services in the ministry, and that there are people there who are trained to deal with ADHD. Mr. Minister, with all due respect, in preparation for this debate, I checked with several schools in my constituency where there are children with these problems, including 2 government schools. And they categorically told me that they did not have any support for ADHD problems in their schools. A couple minutes ago, because I wanted to be sure what I was going to say, I sent back to my personal assistant and researcher to check again to see whether what they said was true. And she came back to me with a message. They said again there was no provision and nothing available from in terms of what you are saying to deal with those problems in the school. So it might be that you may want to tell us and tell the public, and I'm not challenging you, but for the purposes of openness and transparency, you may want to tell the public who are the particular people trained in your ministry in behavioral interventions, particularly related to the matter of ADHD in the ministry. You might want to tell the public how many tests have been done on students in the schools, right, where these matters have been reported to the ministry. Because in 1995, when I first started to research and deal with this problem, I went to the Ministry of Education. And there was a psychologist there who was attached to the ministry, and that psychologist indicated to me that, and I don't want to use he or she now, the psychologist did not even know about ADD, ADHD in 1995 in the Ministry of Education. It's strange, but it's very true what I'm telling you here today. So, Mr. Minister, it will be very interesting if you might want to provide a ministerial statement in the future in this Parliament, in which you can tell us who are these people trained, how many persons have been tested in the school system as a result of the ADHD and so on. And, Mr. Minister, through the Speaker, there's a committee on assurances in the House. And you have given some assurances today that the ministry is going to make certain interventions. Now, with Committee on Assurances, I would hope that there's some time limit that a minister will be given in order to provide the information that something is implemented. I will hate to think that after such a beautiful debate, after such a debate that will have a profound impact, not only upon today, but the future of the society, if we take these matters with some seriousness, that you will be able to say, I'm going to come back to this House in 8 weeks, 2 months, and say to you that members of this House, I have done X, Y, and Z in order to implement and provide an actionable program to deal with this ADHD matter. I really would like to see that done. Madam Speaker, the recommendations are going to seriously impact on the society, on students, and as adults. And let me say that because of this debate and the depth of the contribution debate, the Ministry of Education has a chance to design a new paradigm. A new paradigm. We have an opportunity for a new paradigm in how we treat with this matter of ADD and ADHD in the schools. And as well, within that new paradigm, to look at the whole question of disabilities and how we treat with them in the education system. I want to appeal, Madam Speaker, to the media to pay more attention to this particular debate that took place here during the last two sessions. And to use the opportunity to sensitize the public a little more about this matter of ADD and ADHD in the population. Dr. Bodoe, member for Fyzabad, in his contribution, pointed out the research that showed the connection between people with ADHD and people in jail. People with ADHD and the tendency to engage in behaviors that are inimical to societal interest. And this is why it is extremely important that the media also take a role in this matter of sensitizing the public. It is not just the contentious issues which the population is interested in. The population is very interested also in the non-scandalous issues, the developmental issues, the human developmental issues, and the one that can make a profound impact upon the quality of life in the society, and particularly in the quality of life that their children and family members will enjoy in the future. So there's a role and responsibility for the media in this regard. Madam Speaker, the reality is that ADD and ADHD, or I should just say ADHD, is real. There is a significant body of research to show that the behavioral components and consequences of ADHD are significant. Now, I also appreciate from the research and what has been said here that there is also a body of opinion which suggests that too much attention is placed on ADHD. And that body of research goes on to say that it is a convenient whipping horse and excuse for negative behavior. Be that as it may. But I think now the research is leaning more towards showing that ADHD is a significant problem. And the member for Fyzabad, in the scientific description he gave about the neurology of the situation, pointed out that research is now going on to show how you might deal with the transmitters and how you might reverse the situation. Also in the United States of America, if you read the documentation from Chad, you will see that people diagnosed with ADHD under the DSM are now protected by law also. They are protected. So this is no longer, yes, it's a reality that we must hear. And I therefore would like to think that if we want to err, we should err on the side of saying that 12% of our population are likely to be people with ADHD. Let us err on the side of what is apparent before our eyes, and err on the side of that which recognizes that there is a problem and that there are children in our classrooms who are impetuous, who have short attention spans, are disruptive, and need help. That is more important than anything else. Now, we talked about research on the matter of ADHD. And I'm not going to knock the university. I'm not going to knock the Faculty of Humanities and Education at the university or the Department of Behavioral Sciences and so on. But when you see the lack of research on a matter like this, you wonder to what extent the university is playing the role it should really play in developmental matters in society and in research. You really begin to wonder. And I will appeal to the principal of the university from this floor here today, that maybe they need to look at some of the real societal issues like this one and put their minds in those faculties towards doing the kind of research that will provide for the ministry the kind of information and statistical base that will allow you to make even more informed decisions about that matter. Madam Speaker, when I began to inquire more deeply about this problem, and even just before the debate, I started to talk to a couple of medical people. And in fact, I was shocked that when they told me that there was little research done, because I went to them first to find what research they had for figures and so on. So there's little research done. But when they told me that they were actually treating children with ADHD and prescribing drugs, I had to ask the question, so how are you prescribing drugs to these children if you haven't done an assessment and made a proper diagnosis? And I asked that question very seriously from the floor of this parliament today. Very seriously from the floor of this parliament today. Because I think it's on one of the newspapers today where another lady is speaking about her condition of having third stage cervical cancer, fourth stage, when she was told that by a private physician. But for months before that, she was being diagnosed, and all they were trying to stabilize her. And I wonder to what extent in the public institutions, health institutions, we are really doing the depth of research on patients when they come there, and not really just doing very cursory kinds of examinations, when more detailed examination. Thankfully, that lady is still alive, because she said she didn't intend to die and leave her daughter to think about her future, and she's still alive today. But it really is really something that bothers me about, what kind of examinations are being done and research on the whole. So I want to appeal for more focused research on the real societal issues that we have to deal with. The member for Caroni East mentioned a drug a moment ago, Ritalin, as one of the drugs that being prescribed. But you know how many doctors tell people that Ritalin can affect your heart? How many doctors tell people that Ritalin can lead to tics, and motions and movements? Whatever it is, but it can lead to that. So they're prescribing drugs, but these drugs have some impacts, have some impacts on the individual. So we've got to be very careful with the prescription of drugs. Now, the member for Laventille West asked me a while ago, is there a cure for ADHD? And I said to him, there's a cure. And the cure has to do with how you develop self-awareness of the problem, and you are able to negotiate with yourself when the condition sets in, and therefore control your behavior. Control. It's a kind of self-discipline and a self-imposed therapy in which you have to deal with the problem. And I can tell you, now I know when ADHD is coming on, and so on, and you draw back. Otherwise, you continue to be very impulsive and very impetuous. Now, ADHD people are not dunce people. By the way, they are very bright people. ADHD people are not dunce people. They are very bright people. The member for Cumuto, Manzanilla, gave that story of that young man and showed that, it was a very bright individual that you are dealing with. The member for Aruka Maloney told me that I should correct the records about the design of the Borough Hall in Chaguanas. And just as an aside, Madam Speaker, you might find the story very interesting. The designers, the ones who finally drew the building up, is Jaspal Bogal and Associates. But when we first, through the Ministry of Local Government, Mr. Rennie Dumas was then the minister, when they were first employed to design this building, they brought back a design which was a square building. A square building. And I said to Mr. Bogal, Mr. Bogal, this building has no emotions. This building doesn't facilitate communication between people. You're talking about a town hall. You're talking about a community meeting place. And I hope Mr. Bogal still has the drawing that I gave to him. I sat down there on my desk, and I I put my hands like this on the desk, and I said, look at my hands. This is half a circle here, and this is half a circle here. I want the building in two half a circles like this, with a courtyard in the middle. I want cars to drive in and out of the front, and I want an auditorium at the back, and I gave him that drawing. So if I'm correcting it, Aruka Maloney, I'm correcting where the concept of the design came from for the Chaguanas Borough Hall. It came from what I gave to Mr. Bogal following the rejection of the square building. Because, square building. But that's an interesting aside.
Keep going, sir.
Yeah, well, I am not afraid to see what I see here. Madam Speaker, the ADHD issue has shown us how much we have to work, how hard we have to work with our children in the schools, and how much more work we have to do as parents in observation of our children. I think the point was well made by the member for Tobago East, that this is not just a problem for the teachers. The teachers inherit the problem. It's a problem for the home, and a problem for the parents. You see, it is easy to blame governments, it's easy to blame ministers for shortcomings and so on in the education system. And yes, ministers must take responsibility, and they ought to take responsibility for what is happening in the school system. But there's also a role for the administrators below the minister as to what is happening in the school system. And I think, with all respect Minister of Education that the administration of the education system leaves a lot to be desired when it comes to matters like what we are debating here today. It leaves a lot to be desired. I know that's a hard pill for you to swallow after you have, as it were, big up the PNM and so on. This hasn't got to do with PNM. It hasn't got to do with UNC. It hasn't got to do with NAR. Nothing like that. It has to do with public servants and public officials who must see their work as worship. They must see themselves as servant leaders. And then you will make a difference to how the matters are done in the public service. That is where the difference will come. Because the mark, the distinguishing mark of an educational institution in our country will be in its ability to deal with the exceptions and not just the norm. And I think we'll have to talk about, the minister, you have to talk to them about a process, or what are the protocols, which is a very famous word now for the member for St. Joseph. What are the protocols to be applied when they discover that a child may be a potential ADHD case? That's one thing, good way you can start. What are the protocols you're going to put in place so that that teacher, that principal can then, enact the process and get help? Because, Mr. Minister, I'm telling you in all sincerity, there is no support for the schools when children are so designated with ADHD. We want to build a student-centered education system. That is the goal of everyone, a student-centered education system. And that is not just about curriculum. We are focusing a lot on curriculum. But the curriculum will be of no use. The best physical infrastructure will be of no use unless we deal with the psychological, emotional, the responsiveness, the attentiveness which we pay to that child in that classroom. Madam Speaker, I may go furthest to tell you that one of the best ways to approach children with ADHD or children in school with problems is love. Love. Love conquers all. And a child who feels unloved in a school is a child who will grow up with rejection, even in a home. Madam Speaker, look at children in your own home and you'll see that sometimes a child in your home that you're probably having trouble with is gravitating to somebody, and sometimes to the wrong people outside the home. And you know why? Because that child goes there and finds love and finds acceptance, which is missing in the home environment. And as parents, you'll find that you better provide love and acceptance for your children, otherwise they may just go to places where they should not go and then find it, and then you have a bigger problem on your hand. And ADHD children are like that. ADHD, they give you trouble. And they don't know why they're giving you trouble. From morn till noon, till night they could give you trouble. But then they could be very loving children too, I tell you. Very compassionate, very understanding. It's the mood swings also that is involved. Madam Speaker, so this is not just about teaching skills. It's not just about learning and absorption capacity. It's not just about tailored methodology. It's much more than that. It's about dealing with a human being, a special human being. And that is what is important, a very, very special human being. Madam Speaker, the member for Tobago East used a very beautiful word, and this is very close to me. She used the word child-friendly communities. Madam Speaker, in my own constituency, I've introduced, about 4 years ago, child-friendly communities. And a child-friendly community is where you have a group of persons in the community who will make sure that the community is friendly to the child. Friendly to the child. So if in that community, for example, you do not have a playground and the children are accustomed playing cricket, let's say, on the roadway, and you find that you have someone who drives very badly on the road, that group will contact that person to say, this is a child-friendly community. Or if it is that in that community, there's no water, and you find that the children are affected, that group also comes and says, listen, let us try and get water to that community. And these are the things we have been doing in several communities. So we have to develop child-friendly communities in this country. And maybe what we should be doing is putting up signs saying, you are entering a child-friendly community. You know what that will mean? You know that vision of what that is? You know nationally what that will do for our perception of our children and how we treat our children. You cannot talk about a future that of the kind that you want, with well-balanced people, with people who will grow up with love rather than hate, and so on, if you do not give them the values and the virtues and the environment in which they learn to love.
Absolutely.
You know, Madam Speaker, there's a very elderly lady who came to visit me in my office. And there was another elderly lady who was in the office at the time. So both of them are sitting there having a cup of tea with me. And the one who came to visit me had come for a very special reason. She came to tell me that she was having problems. And her children were not visiting her. And if I could approach the children to tell them that she's very lonely and they should come and visit her. This is interesting. They come to a member of parliament for something like this. And the other grandmother who was there said to her something so interesting that has remained with me. She says, maybe you didn't teach your children how to love when they were young, so they are now forgotten to love you in your old age. It was very, very interesting. Very instructive, one grandmother to another a mother and grandmother. It was very instructive. So child-friendly communities, I think that is very important that we deal with it. So, Madam Speaker, I want to thank you very much for the opportunity provided for this debate. And I hope that this House will have many more debates like this one, where the people's interests are concerned, where the people's welfare are concerned, when we can show to the population that we are interested in things more fundamental, that affects them where they are. We are talking here about making laws and so on and so forth, but we must also think about what's affecting people where they are. We must come out of the parliament and put our feet in their shoes, put our minds into their heads, for a moment transmit ourselves into their homes and to see what they are facing and what we can do here in order to enhance their capacity for a more fruitful, productive life. Maybe in the future, we will see a debate in this parliament like this, but we'll deal with more fundamental issues. The issue of productivity in this country and the issue of commitment to nation and what is happening in there. Maybe those are the kinds of debates that we need to introduce in this House. Maybe we'll see a debate on the criminal justice system so that we can further understand why why there's such a high level of people returning to crime and so on in the society, so that we can help them, Madam Speaker. So there are many issues that we can debate in this regard. I intend to file motions that will deal with these, because I really want to myself have a new paradigm in terms of what the representation is about and what the parliament is about. And with these few words, Madam Speaker, again, I thank all my colleagues for the support for this motion, and I thank you.
Honourable members, the question is, be it resolved that the Ministry of Education initiate a program in schools to 1. Identify children with ADD, ADHD. 2. Train teachers to manage such students in the classrooms. And 3. Implement a long-term strategy in schools to assist children so identified. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? I guess the ayes have it. Honourable members, it is now 4:27, and this House is now suspended for half an hour.
Follow the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago on Twitter. Our call sign is @TTParliament. You're viewing